Have you ever wondered why the deepest truths a man carries remain hidden? Until he's undone by a woman he thought he could live without? Not every man. Only the ones who have buried too much, for too long. Men shaped by stoicism without soul, by pride without presence. Men who walk with bravado yet crumble in silence. You've met him. Maybe you've loved him. The one who seemed unbothered, who kept you guessing, who wore confidence like a shield but whose eyes gave him away when no one was watching. And then, you broke him. Not by rage, not by cruelty, but by something far more devastating to his ego. Your absence. Your withdrawal. Your detachment. The moment you stopped trying, stopped proving, stopped offering your softness to someone who couldn't hold it. That's when his illusion shattered. Because for men like this, the ones ruled by shadow, it is not rejection that haunts them. It is reflection. And you, unknowingly perhaps, became the mirror that revealed everything he tried as not to see. Carl Jung wrote that the things we suppress in the unconscious return to us in the form of fate. And a woman who walks away with grace becomes fate to the man who refused to meet her with depth. She becomes the initiator, not into rage or revenge, but into his own reckoning. And in that reckoning, his words change. What he couldn't say before, what pride silenced, what ego disguised, what fear diluted, now begins to rise. Not to win you back, not to manipulate, but because the break did something the relationship never could. It cracked his persona wide open. He begins to speak from a place he never knew existed. Because only when the projection collapses, only when the fantasy burns, does the truth have space to emerge. And you, the woman who dared to walk away, may never hear these words. They may come too late. Or they may come as echoes through silence, memories, songs, or pages of unsent letters. But make no mistake, they are spoken, not with lips always, but with regret, with dreams, with longing stitched into the seams of everything he touches thereafter. He begins to admit things to himself first, that he was afraid of your depth, that your presence unnerved him, not because you were unstable, but because you were real. He had only known performance before, surface, strategy. But you loved from your core, and that terrified him. In the Stoic traditions, it is said that the mind resists what threatens the illusion of control. And feminine energy, when it is authentic, when it is not chasing, when it simply is, becomes unbearable to a man still addicted to control. That's why he pulled away, why he criticized, why he tested. He wasn't trying to understand you, he was trying to escape you. Because you triggered something ancient, his own unworthiness. But when you left, truly left, you did something he couldn't run from. You didn't scream, you didn't beg, you vanished. And in that silence, he was left alone with the version of himself that had no one to impress. No mask, no audience, just the truth. That's when the words begin. Not all at once, but slowly, like rain after a long drought. He confesses, perhaps not aloud, but in the places where confession matters, the soul. He admits that he saw you but didn't know how to hold you, that he felt something profound but didn't know how to name it, that you reached parts of him that scared him more than any fight ever could. These aren't words of romance. They are words of realization, and they emerge only in the aftermath of loss, when the illusion of invincibility dies. So, if you've ever walked away from a man like this and doubted whether he ever felt anything at all, know this: he did. He just didn't know how to feel it until it was gone. And while he begins to unravel, you begin to rise. Because the woman who breaks a man in this way is not destructive. She is transformational. She is the storm that washes away illusion, the silence that exposes truth. TCSASTA, he mirror that does not lie. And no matter how much time passes, no matter how far you drift, there are things he will only ever say once he's been broken by you. Words that reveal not your power over him, but your power to awaken him. There are words a man cannot say until he has been undone. Words that live beneath the armor, beneath the practiced detachment, beneath the scripts of what it means to be strong, stoic, and untouched. These words only surface when a woman, not angry, not chaotic, but quiet and sure, chooses to leave, not in rage, but in revelation. He may have thought he was fine, that your presence was optional, that your love was replaceable. He may have convinced himself that emotional control meant emotional mastery. But now, in the absence you left behind, his soul stirs with the things he never dared to voice when you were still within reach. And the first of these truths, the one that breaks open the rest, is this: I never thought you'd actually leave. Not because he believed you weak, but because he thought you loved him too much to choose yourself. He mistook your patience for permanence, your softness for surrender, and so he tested your thresholds, not to harm you, but because he didn't believe in boundaries that held. But now, with your energy gone, he sees it. You were never asking for too much. You were asking for something he was too afraid to give. This is the first wound, and it's not to the heart, it's to the ego, because to admit that you were right, not in superiority, but in sincerity, means admitting that he failed not just you, but himself. And this is where the second confession brews in his bones, whether spoken aloud or buried in his silence. I didn't know how to love you, because you weren't convenient. You weren't the easy kind. You required presence, honesty, depth. You didn't feed his ego, you confronted it. You asked real questions. You saw through the distractions. And in doing so, you did something many women do not dare. You challenged the parts of him he had hidden away for years. And that kind of love, that is not soothing, not at first. It's awakening, and awakening hurts. Carl Jung understood this well, that true intimacy often begins where the ego ends. And for many men, that line is not crossed until loss forces them into it. Until the absence becomes louder than the words ever were. Until your silence becomes the mirror they can no longer escape. He may tell himself stories, that you were dramatic, that you expected too much, that you moved on too fast. But in quiet moments, the moments when no one is looking, the real truth breaks through. She was the first woman who saw me, and I looked away. This is where grief enters, not just for losing you, but for realizing what he was not ready to receive. And grief, when allowed to speak, becomes alchemy. It strips him of the false self, the man who measured worth through conquest, the man who equated silence with strength, the man who needed to be adored but feared being known. Now adoration feels hollow, and being known feels like salvation, but it's too late. He may confess to another, or he may speak these truths into journals, therapists' offices, or midnight skies. But know this, the woman who breaks a man does not break his heart. She breaks his delusion, and in that breaking, he becomes capable of feeling, perhaps for the first time. And you who left not in hatred but in clarity, are no longer the object of his desire. You are the ghost of his becoming. The presence he carries into every room, not because you haunt him, but because you revealed him. There is a kind of power in this, not because you hurt him, but because you rearranged him. He now knows what it means to stand before a woman and feel utterly seen, and that knowing cannot be unlearned. He will compare, not out of bitterness, but out of resonance. He will look into other eyes and feel their softness, but also their safety. The safety of not being challenged, not being cracked open, not being asked to feel anything real. And in that safety, he will suffocate. Because once a man has tasted a woman who evokes his soul, silence becomes a weight he cannot name. And yet you are not waiting for these confessions. You are not clinging to the possibility of redemption, because you know the feminine does not stay to be chosen. She stays as long as she is cherished, and when she is not, she walks and never returns as the same woman. Eventually, the words become heavier than the silence. They press against his chest in the middle of the night, in the pause between distractions, in the hollow space where your energy used to breathe life into his days. He remembers the way you looked at him, not with worship, but with depth. The way your presence felt less like possession and more like an invitation, one he never had the courage to accept, so he speaks again, not to the world, but to the memory of you. 2. the version of himself he only became in your presence. The third confession rises like smoke from a fire he thought he extinguished. You made me want to be better, and I hated you for it. Not in the way of malice, but in the way that all unconscious egos resist being awakened. He saw your strength, your knowing, your intuition, and instead of rising to meet it, he shrank. He mocked what he couldn't match. He distanced himself from what he couldn't control. Because to truly step toward you, to truly open himself, would have required the death of the persona he had built so carefully, and few men are ready to die that kind of death. You didn't ask him to become someone else. You only asked for truth, for presence, for soul. But he interpreted that request through the lens of inadequacy, as if your depth was an indictment of his hollowness. And in the end, he didn't just lose you. He lost the version of himself that only existed in the warmth of your trust. Still, the story continued. As Jung taught us, we are always being called toward wholeness, through dreams, through projections, through loss. And once a man has been broken open by a woman of truth, he cannot return to the world untouched. Your impact becomes a compass, sometimes guiding him, sometimes haunting him, but never leaving him unchanged. This is where the fourth confession quietly forms in the marrow of his being. I sabotaged it because I didn't believe I deserved it. He didn't say this when you cried. He didn't admit it when you begged for presence. He didn't even whisper it when you finally left. But now, as the silence stretches long and wide, he sees it. Every cold remark, every withdrawal, every time he made you feel like you were asking for too much. It wasn't about you. It was about his own unworthiness screaming through his actions. The shadow, when unacknowledged, always seeks destruction. And what better to destroy than the very thing that holds a mirror to our soul? He may tell Stoke, hers, that you were too intense, too emotional, too complicated. But when he's alone with his own reflection, he knows. You loved him in a way that was pure. And that kind of love is terrifying to a man who's still trying to earn his worth instead of realize it. But here's the paradox. The deeper his confessions go, the higher you rise in his memory. Not as a saint, not as an ideal, but as the moment his real self began to stir beneath the rubble of the false. And yet, he's too late. Because you, too, have been transformed. Your silence wasn't passive, it was sacred. While he was unraveling, you were rebuilding. Not a better version of yourself for him, but the truer version of yourself for you. You began to remember that your worth was never negotiable, that your softness was not weakness, that your love was never something to be earned, only received. This is the cruel beauty of timing. Sometimes the breaking of a man is the birthing of a woman. And so, the fifth confession lives, on his lips, like an unanswered prayer. You were the only one who saw me, and I looked away. This truth, more than any other, lingers. Because once a man knows he has been seen, truly seen, and still chose the mask, he begins to realize just how much of his life has been performance. And you? You were the one moment that called him to authenticity, but you are no longer available for that calling. You are now a part of his myth, a chapter he will revisit in quiet moments, a name that lives beneath his breath. Not as a failure, but as a reckoning, a mirror that arrived too soon, or perhaps exactly when it needed to. Somewhere deep within, in the quiet after the storm, the final confessions grow heavier, more sacred, more brutal in their honesty. He doesn't speak them to impress. He doesn't speak them to win you back. He speaks them because he has to, or the silence will devour him. And so comes the sixth confession, perhaps the one that haunts him the most. You were home, and I looked left. Not because you were suffocating, not because you were unloving, but because to stand in the presence of that kind of feminine truth, raw, intuitive, wild, wise, required a kind of grounding he didn't yet possess. And so he ran, into the arms of easier women, into the chaos of distraction, into his work, his pride, his habits, his ego. He left, not realizing that he wasn't just leaving you, He was leaving the only version of himself that ever truly felt whole. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And so many men do exactly that. They leave the woman who brings them closer to their truth, then blame fate when every other connection feels like a shadow of what once was. Because the woman who breaks a man isn't the one who destroys him. She is the one who reflects him. And reflection, when the soul is unprepared, feels like destruction. But even destruction can be holy. And in the ashes of what he lost, he now stands naked before himself, stripped of illusions, sobered by truth. And this leads to the final confession. "You didn't break me. You revealed me." He says it now not with bitterness, but with reverence. He finally understands that what felt like heartbreak was actually the collapse of his false self, the performance he perfected for years, the distance he kept from intimacy, the emotional armor he thought would protect him, when all it did was isolate him from what he craved most. You cracked the shell, not out of cruelty, but from truth. You asked him to be present, to be real, to feel. You asked for the kind of intimacy that couldn't be faked, and when he failed to meet it, you left, not to punish him, but to protect your own soul. And now, in the quiet of his inner world, he finally sees what you were offering. Not romance, not control, not dependence, but redemption. The feminine in her highest form is always redemptive. She does not force a man to rise. She simply embodies the frequency that makes remaining asleep unbearable. And now, you are gone. And yet you remain, in his thoughts, in the way he speaks slower when something reminds him of you, in the way he stares a little longer at women who carry that same grounded intensity, in the way he finally begins to face himself. This is not your victory. It is not your burden either. It is the natural alchemy of walking away when staying would cost you your self-respect. And you no longer ache to be understood. You no longer need him to see your worth because you have seen it for yourself. And in doing so, you've become unreachable to the man who once took your light for granted. You are not waiting, not for apologies, not for closure, not for him to become what he could have been. You are no longer the echo of his potential. You are the presence of your own becoming. You've learned that the feminine doesn't need to chase to be chosen. She only needs to remember who she is, and when she does, the man who once dismissed her will feel it. Not as punishment, but as prophecy. Because when a man finally tells the truth about the woman who broke him, he's not just grieving her. He's grieving who he could have become beside her. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.